That's all Candace Murphy could say when her black daughter walked into the gala. The same daughter she claimed had died at birth. 23 years later, she's back. And this time, she brought proof. Comment where you're listening from and enjoy the story from African Legacy Tales. The champagne glass slipped from Candace Murphy's manicured fingers, shattering against the marble floor of the grand ballroom. The sound seemed to echo through her very soul as she stared across the crowded charity gala at a young woman whose dark eyes held a familiar spark. A spark she had tried to forget for 23 years. "Mother, are you all right?" Her son Adrian rushed to her side, his concerned voice barely penetrating the fog of recognition that had enveloped her. Candace couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The elegant woman standing near the auction display, her natural hair crowned in a sophisticated updo, her smile radiant as she spoke with potential donors, looked exactly like the baby Candace had held for exactly 47 minutes before making the most devastating decision of her life. "Hook, what secrets will unravel at this reunion?" "I need some air," Candace whispered, her voice trembling as she pushed past the concerned guests who had gathered around the commotion. But she couldn't escape the memories that came flooding back like a relentless tide. 23 years earlier, the labor had been excruciating, made worse by the shame that consumed Candace's 17-year-old heart. Her parents had banished her to a private facility 3 states away, telling their social circle she was studying abroad. The lie came easier than the truth that their precious daughter had fallen in love with Benny, their gardener's son. And the result of that forbidden romance was about to enter the world. "She's beautiful," the nurse had said, placing the tiny bundle in Candace's arms. The baby's skin was a perfect café au lait, her tiny fist grasping Candace's finger with surprising strength. For those precious minutes, Candace had forgotten everything. Her parents' horrified faces when they discovered her pregnancy, her father's threats to disown her mother's tears of what she called family disgrace. All that mattered was this perfect little person who had come from love, even if that love was deemed unacceptable by everyone who mattered in Candace's sheltered world. Then her father had entered the room. "Sign the papers, Candace." His voice was as cold as winter steel. "The adoptive family is waiting. They'll give her a good life with her own kind. But Daddy, she's nothing to us." His words cut deeper than any physical wound. "You sign those papers or you lose everything. Your trust fund, your family, your future. Choose wisely." Candace's hands had shaken as she held the pen. The baby had been sleeping peacefully, unaware that her entire world was about to change. Through her tears, Candace had managed to whisper, "I'm sorry, little one. I'm so sorry." She had signed away her daughter's life with 3 strokes of her pen. Now, as Candace stood on the hotel's terrace overlooking the city lights, she realized that time hadn't healed this wound, it had only taught her to live with the constant ache of loss. She had married someone her parents approved of, given them the grandchildren they wanted, lived the life they had orchestrated for her. But every birthday, every Mother's Day, every quiet moment she had wondered about the little girl she had given away. "Mrs. Murphy," a gentle voice broke through her torment. Candace turned to find a hotel staff member holding her evening purse. "You left this inside, ma'am." "Thank you," she managed, taking the purse with trembling hands. As she did, a program from the charity auction fell out, and her eyes immediately found the name that made her knees weak. Anna Donalds, Director of Youth Advocacy Programs. The same dark eyes from the photograph stared back at her from the program's bio section. The resemblance to Benny was unmistakable. The curve of her smile, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence that seemed to radiate from her gaze. Candace's daughter hadn't just survived. She had thrived. But as Candace read Anna's biography, detailing her work with disadvantaged youth and her own experience growing up in foster care after her adoptive parents died in a car accident when she was 8, the guilt threatened to consume her entirely. The daughter she had abandoned to protect had faced the very hardships Candace's father had claimed to be saving her from. Candace clutched the program to her chest, her heart racing as she made a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She would find a way to approach Anna, to somehow make amends for the choice that had haunted her every day for over 2 decades. But as she turned to go back inside, she saw Anna through the glass doors, deep in conversation with someone Candace couldn't see clearly. The young woman's expression had changed. Her smile had faded, replaced by a look of shock and something that might have been recognition. Candace's blood ran cold as she realized that Anna was staring directly back at her through the glass. And in those familiar dark eyes, she saw something that made her heart stop. The same devastating recognition that had shattered Candace's champagne glass just moments before. Somehow, impossibly, Anna knew who she was. But how? Candace's legs felt like they might give out as she watched Anna excuse herself from her conversation and begin walking purposefully toward the terrace doors. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide from the confrontation that had been 23 years in the making. The glass door opened with a soft whoosh, and suddenly they were face to face. Mother and daughter, strangers bound by blood and separated by a lifetime of pain. "Candace Murphy," Anna said quietly, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly. "I wondered if I'd ever see you again. You know who I am." Candace's voice came out as barely a whisper. Anna's laugh held no humor. "I've known for exactly 7 years, 3 months, and 12 days. That's when I hired a private investigator after my last foster family kicked me out on my 18th birthday." She paused, studying Candace's face with an intensity that made the older woman want to disappear. "Did you know that adoption records aren't as sealed as people think? Especially when you're determined enough and willing to work 3 jobs to pay for the search." Candace felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Anna, you want to know the funny thing?" Anna continued, her composure beginning to crack. "I used to imagine this moment. I used to think about what I'd say to you, what I'd ask you, whether you'd even remember me." Her voice grew softer, more vulnerable. "Whether you ever wondered if I was okay." The question hung between them like a bridge neither knew how to cross. "Every single day," Candace whispered, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. "Every single day for 23 years. For a moment, Anna's carefully constructed armor seemed to falter. But then she straightened her shoulders, and Candace saw a strength there that reminded her achingly of Benny. "Then why didn't you look for me?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of 2 decades of abandonment. Candace opened her mouth, then closed it. How could she explain the cowardice that had kept her trapped in a life that was never really hers? How could she tell this accomplished, beautiful woman that she had chosen comfort over courage again and again? "Because I was afraid," she finally admitted. "Afraid you'd hate me. Afraid you'd have every right to." "I did hate you," Anna said matter-of-factly. 4 years. Do you want to know what it's like to be bounced from home to home? To never have anyone who's really yours? Candace's heart shattered a little more with each word. "The Donalds, my adoptive parents, they were good people. They loved me. But they died when I was 8. And after that," Anna's voice trailed off. "Let's just say the system isn't kind to kids who don't fit the perfect picture families are looking for." "I'm so sorry," Candace breathed. "I thought my father said you'd have a good life." "That father?" Anna's eyebrows rose. "You mean the man who threatened to cut off all contact with his only grandchild because she didn't look the way he wanted her to?" Candace's face went white. "How do you?" The private investigator was very thorough. "I know about the trust fund contingent on my never existing. I know about the story your family told about you studying in Europe. I know about Adrian and Debbie, the children you kept." Anna's voice grew quieter, more dangerous. I know you chose them over me before I was even a day old." The words hit Candace like physical blows. She sank onto a nearby bench, her elegant composure completely shattered. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I was 17. I was so scared and my parents were racist." Anna finished the sentence with brutal honesty. "Let's call it what it was, Candace. They couldn't stand the idea of having a black grandchild, and you chose their approval over your own daughter." The silence stretched between them, filled with years of pain and unspoken truths. Finally, Candace looked up at Anna, her eyes red with tears, but clearer than they'd been in decades. "You're right about all of it. I was weak and selfish, and I failed you in every way that mattered." She paused, gathering what little courage she had left. "But I want you to know that giving you up was the biggest mistake of my life. Not a day has passed that I haven't regretted it." Anna studied her for a long moment, and Candace could see the war happening behind those dark eyes. The little girl who had always wondered why she wasn't wanted fighting with the strong woman who had learned to protect herself. "I used to imagine you coming to find me," Anna said finally. "When I was little, I'd pretend that you were searching everywhere, that you missed me so much you couldn't sleep. I'd make up stories about why you had to give me away, that you were sick or in danger, or that someone had stolen me from you." She wiped a tear from her cheek. "It was easier than accepting that you just didn't want me enough to fight for me." Candace stood up abruptly, her emotions overwhelming her careful control. "I did want you. I wanted you so much it felt like dying to let you go. But I was a child myself and I let other people make my choices for me. I let fear win. And now?" Anna asked, her voice barely audible. Before Candace could answer, the terrace door opened again and Adrian stepped outside, his face creased with concern. "Mother, everyone's looking for you." "The auction is about to." He stopped mid-sentence as he noticed Anna and Candace watched in horror as recognition dawned in her son's eyes. "Oh my God," Adrian whispered, his face going pale. "You're her, aren't you? You're the one Mother gave away." Anna's expression hardened instantly. "I'm the one she abandoned." "Yes." Adrian looked between the two women, and Candace could see the wheels turning in his mind. All the pieces of family history that had never quite fit. All the times he'd caught his mother crying for no reason he could understand. All the whispered conversations between his parents that stopped when he entered the room. "Does Father know you're here?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Because all three of them knew that if Chuck Murphy discovered his abandoned granddaughter had resurfaced, especially at such a public venue, the consequences would be swift and brutal. And as if summoned by their fears, Candace's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face went white as she read it. "What is it?" Anna asked despite herself. Candace looked up, her eyes filled with panic. "Your grandfather, he's here. He just arrived at the gala, and someone told him I was having an interesting conversation on the terrace." The three of them stood frozen for a moment, bound together by the approaching storm that threatened to destroy whatever fragile connection had just begun to form between mother and daughter. But then they heard it, the sound of expensive shoes clicking purposefully across the marble floor inside, growing closer to the terrace doors. Chuck Murphy was coming, and he had no idea that the granddaughter he had erased from existence was about to walk back into his life. The terrace door swung open with the force of a man accustomed to making dramatic entrances. Chuck Murphy stepped outside, his silver hair perfectly styled, his black tuxedo immaculate despite his 72 years. His piercing blue eyes swept the scene with the calculating gaze of someone who had spent decades controlling every aspect of his family's narrative. "Candace, what in God's name are you doing out here? People are asking questions about." His words died in his throat as his gaze fell upon Anna. The silence that followed was deafening. Candace watched her father's face cycle through a series of emotions. Confusion, recognition, and then a cold fury that made her blood freeze. She had seen that look before 23 years ago when she had begged him to let her keep her baby. "You," Chuck said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of thunder. "What are you doing here?" Anna lifted her chin with a defiance that reminded Candace painfully of her younger self. "Hello, grandfather. Lovely to finally meet you in person." The word grandfather hit Chuck like a physical blow. His face flushed red, then went dangerously pale. Adrian stepped instinctively closer to his mother as if to shield her from the explosion they all knew was coming. "You have no right to call me that," Chuck snarled, his composure cracking. "You have no right to be here, to speak to my family, to exist." Anna interrupted, her voice steady, but her eyes blazing. "You made that very clear 23 years ago when you forced my mother to sign me away like I was damaged goods." Chuck's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "That girl," he said, pointing at Candace, "made her choice. She chose her family, her future, her responsibilities over a mistake that would have destroyed everything we'd built." "I wasn't a mistake," Anna said quietly, but with such conviction that it cut through Chuck's rage like a blade. "I was a baby, your granddaughter, and you threw me away because my skin wasn't the right color for your precious reputation." "Don't you dare," Chuck started. But Adrian unexpectedly stepped forward. "She's right, isn't she?" Adrian said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and revelation. "All those years of you preaching about family values, about protecting the Murphy name, and you abandoned your own flesh and blood because she didn't look like us." Chuck whirled on his son. "You don't understand the complexities." "I understand perfectly," Adrian shot back, surprising everyone, including himself. "I understand that I've had a sister all my life and you made sure I never knew her. I understand that mother has been carrying this guilt for decades and you've let her suffer rather than admit you made a terrible mistake." Candace stared at her son in amazement. She had never seen Adrian stand up to his father like this. The boy who had always been desperate for Chuck's approval was finally seeing the man behind the patriarch's mask. "Adrian, you're out of line," Chuck warned. But his usual commanding presence seemed diminished. "No, Dad, you are." Adrian turned to Anna, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and regret. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I didn't know, that I couldn't." Anna studied him for a moment, seeing perhaps an ally where she had expected an enemy. "It's not your fault, you were a child when this happened, but you're not a child now." The weight of her words settled over Adrian like a challenge. Candace could see him processing everything. The family dynamics that had never quite made sense. His mother's inexplicable sadness on certain days. The way conversations stopped when he entered rooms. "What's your name?" Adrian asked quietly. "Your real name, I mean. The one our parents gave you before?" He couldn't finish the sentence. "Carol," Anna said softly. And Candace gasped. She had forgotten. In those precious 47 minutes, she had whispered a name to her baby daughter. "My birth mother named me Carol before she signed me away. But the Donalds called me Anna, and that's who I became." "Carol," Candace whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I remember. You were so perfect, so beautiful, and I called you Carol because it means princess, and you were my little princess." Chuck made a sound of disgust. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. This emotional nonsense, this disruption to our lives. Anna turned on him with sudden ferocity. "What about my life? Do you know what happened to me after you erased me from your perfect family picture?" "I don't care," Chuck said coldly. And the cruelty in those 3 words seemed to suck all the oxygen from the terrace. But Anna smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. You should care because while you've been living in your mansion and attending your charity galas, I've been making quite a name for myself. Do you know what I do for a living, grandfather? Chuck's eyes narrowed suspiciously at her tone. I'm a social worker and youth advocate. I specialize in cases involving family abandonment and institutional racism and adoption services, and I've written extensively about the psychological impact of colorism within families. She paused, letting that sink in. I've also been invited to speak at next month's national conference on family values. You know, the one your company sponsors every year. Chuck's face went ashen. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't dare what? Tell my story, share my experience, discuss how wealthy white families abandoned their mixed-race children to preserve their social standing. Anna's voice was sugar-sweet, but her eyes were steel. Why, that's exactly what I've been invited to talk about. Candace watched her father's world begin to crumble. The Murphy name, built on decades of carefully crafted public image, suddenly hung in the balance. The man who had wielded power and control like weapons was facing an opponent he couldn't buy, threaten, or intimidate. You want to destroy us? Chuck said, his voice hollow. No, Anna replied, and for the first time, her voice carried genuine sadness. I want to understand why you destroyed me, why I wasn't worth loving, why my mother's happiness meant so little to you that you'd rather see her live in misery than accept me as part of your family. Candace stepped forward, finding courage she didn't know she possessed. Enough, Daddy. Enough lies. Enough control. Enough pain. I won't let you hurt her anymore. I won't let you hurt any of us anymore. Chuck stared at his daughter as if she had slapped him. Candace, you don't know what you're saying. The scandal, the damage to our reputation. I don't care about our reputation, Candace said, the words feeling like freedom on her tongue. I care about my daughter. The daughter I should have fought for 23 years ago. Mother, Adrian said quietly. And when Candace looked at him, she saw support there, not judgment. What do you need us to do? It was such a simple question, but it changed everything. For the first time in 23 years, Candace felt like she had allies instead of adversaries. But before she could answer, Anna's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression changed to one of alarm. What is it? Candace asked. It's my assistant. There's been an accident at the youth center where I work. One of our kids. She stopped, looking torn between the family crisis unfolding before her and the professional emergency demanding her attention. Go, Candace said immediately. Whatever it is, go take care of it. But we're not finished here, Anna protested. No, we're not, Candace agreed. But those kids need you right now. And she paused, looking directly into her daughter's eyes. I've already stolen 23 years from you. I won't steal another moment from the people who depend on you. Anna stared at her for a long moment, and Candace thought she saw something shift in those dark eyes. Not forgiveness? Not yet, but perhaps the possibility of it. I have to go, Anna said, already moving toward the door, but she stopped and turned back. This isn't over. Any of it. I know, Candace said. And I'll be here when you're ready to continue. As Anna disappeared into the gala, Chuck turned to his daughter with fury in his eyes. You have no idea what you've just set in motion. But Candace was no longer the frightened 17-year-old who had buckled under his pressure. She was a mother who had found her daughter, and she wasn't going to lose her again. Yes, I do, she said quietly. I've set the truth in motion, and it's about time. What none of them knew was that Anna hadn't left because of any emergency at the youth center. The text had been from her private investigator, and the message had contained information that would change everything they thought they knew about the night Carol was born. Information that revealed Chuck Murphy's involvement went far deeper than any of them had imagined. 3 days after the charity gala, Candace sat in her pristine living room, staring at the business card Anna had discreetly slipped into her hand before leaving. The simple white card bore only a name, Detective Ray Collins, private investigator, and a phone number. On the back, in Anna's careful handwriting, were 4 words that had haunted Candace's dreams. "Call him, you'll understand." The house felt suffocating in its silence. Chuck had retreated to his study, refusing to speak to anyone since the confrontation. Adrian had called twice, asking tentative questions about his sister, questions Candace didn't know how to answer. And Debbie, her younger daughter, remained blissfully unaware that her world was about to shift on its axis. Candace's hands trembled as she dialed the number. "Collins Investigations," a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "This is Candace Murphy. I believe you've been researching my family." There was a pause. "Mrs. Murphy, I was wondering when you'd call. Your daughter said you might reach out once she told you about me." "What exactly have you found?" Candace asked, her voice barely steady. "More than you're going to want to hear over the phone. Can you meet me somewhere private? Somewhere your father won't know about." The casual mention of her father sent a chill down Candace's spine. How much do you know about?" "Everything, Mrs. Murphy. And I mean everything." An hour later, Candace sat across from Ray Collins in a small cafe 20 miles from her neighborhood. The detective was nothing like she'd expected. A kind-faced black man in his 60s with gentle eyes that had clearly seen too much of the world's darkness. "Your daughter hired me 7 years ago to find you," he began, sliding a thick manila folder across the table. "But what we discovered went far beyond a simple adoption case." Candace's hands shook as she opened the folder. The first document was a copy of her original birth certificate for Carol, the one she'd held in those precious 47 minutes. But there were other papers beneath it, official-looking documents she didn't recognize. "That's a falsified death certificate," Collins explained quietly. "Dated the day after Carol was born. According to this document filed with the state, your daughter died of complications during birth." Candace's world tilted. "That's impossible. I held her. She was alive. She was perfect. She was very much alive. But someone wanted the world to think otherwise." Collins pointed to a signature at the bottom of the document. "That's your father's signature, Mrs. Murphy. Chuck Murphy paid a doctor to falsify a death certificate for his own granddaughter." The cafe suddenly felt airless. Candace stared at the signature, her father's familiar authoritative scroll on a document declaring her baby dead. "Why would he?" she started, but the words died in her throat as understanding dawned. "Think about it," Collins said gently. "If Carol was officially dead, there would be no risk of her ever coming back to complicate your family's life. No chance of her showing up at 18 looking for answers. No possibility of scandal or embarrassment." Candace felt sick, but the adoption was completely unofficial, off the books. "Your father arranged for a family to take Carol, but legally she never existed after that day. When the Donalds died 8 years later, there were no proper legal guardians because, according to official records, their adopted daughter had been dead for years." The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. That's why she went into foster care. There were no legal protections because she legally didn't exist. Exactly. It took Carol Anna years of legal battles just to establish her identity. She had to prove she was alive, Mrs. Murphy. Can you imagine what that does to a child? Candace buried her face in her hands. Oh God! Oh God! What did he do? There's more, Collins said quietly. And Candace looked up to see real pain in his eyes. The doctor who falsified the death certificate, Dr. Schatz Price. He died 15 years ago, but before he passed, he developed a conscience about some of the things he'd done in his career. Collins pulled out another document, a letter written in shaky handwriting. Dr. Price left this with his attorney to be opened only if someone came looking for the truth about certain falsified records. He kept meticulous notes about all the illegal favors he'd done for wealthy families. Your daughter's case was just one of many. Candace read the letter with growing horror. Dr. Price described how Chuck Murphy had approached him with a proposition. Make the mixed-race baby disappear completely, no questions asked, for a payment of $50,000. He also mentioned something else, Collins continued. Your father didn't just want Carol erased from existence. He wanted to make sure you could never find her, even if you tried. What do you mean? Collins hesitated. The adoption was arranged through a network that placed mixed-race children with families far from their birth families, often in different states, sometimes with families who were told the children had no living relatives. It was designed to make reunification nearly impossible. Candace felt as though she were drowning. Every revelation made her father's betrayal deeper, more calculated. The Donalds were good people, Collins continued. They loved Anna genuinely, but they were told that both her birth parents had died in a car accident and that there was no extended family. When they died, Anna had no one to turn to because everyone believed her birth family was dead. So, when she was 8 years old and orphaned again, she had no one, Candace whispered. No one. She bounced between foster homes for 10 years, and some of them, Collins's jaw tightened. Let's just say your father's actions didn't just erase her existence. They condemned her to a childhood full of pain that could have been avoided. Candace was openly sobbing now. I have to tell her. I have to explain that I didn't know. She knows you didn't know about the death certificate, Collins said gently. That's not why she wanted you to call me. Then why? Collins pulled out one final document. Because 3 weeks ago, we discovered something else. Chuck Murphy has been tracking Anna for the past 5 years. Candace's blood turned to ice. What? He hired a different private investigator to monitor her career, her relationships, her public speaking engagements. He's been building a file on her, documenting everything she said publicly about adoption, family abandonment, institutional racism. The implications hit Candace like a physical blow. He's been planning something. We think so. And whatever it is, he's been preparing for it since she started gaining recognition in her field. Collins slid a photograph across the table. It showed Anna leaving her apartment, clearly taken with a telephoto lens from across the street. This was taken last month. Your father has been having your daughter surveilled, Mrs. Murphy. The question is, why? Before Candace could respond, her phone rang. Adrian's name appeared on the screen. Mom, you need to come home right now. His voice was tight with panic. Dad's called some kind of emergency family meeting. Debbie's here and he's got lawyers with him, legal documents. He keeps talking about protecting the family legacy and neutralizing threats. Candace's heart stopped. I'll be right there. She hung up and looked at Collins with terror in her eyes. He's making his move, isn't he? It looks that way, Collins confirmed grimly. Mrs. Murphy, whatever your father is planning, you need to understand that he's had years to prepare for this moment. He's not going to just sit back and let Anna expose what he did. Candace stood up, her legs unsteady. I have to warn her. She already knows. I called her right before you arrived. Collins handed her another business card. That's her number. She's waiting for your call. As Candace clutched the card, Collins added quietly, "Mrs. Murphy, your father has spent decades controlling your family's narrative, but narratives can be rewritten. The question is, are you ready to help your daughter write the truth?" "Yes," she said firmly. It's time Chuck Murphy learned that some things can't be controlled. But as she drove home to face whatever trap her father had prepared, Candace couldn't shake the feeling that Chuck had one more devastating secret. Something that would test not just her newfound courage, but the fragile connection she was trying to rebuild with the daughter she'd lost. The emergency family meeting wasn't just about protecting the Murphy legacy. It was about destroying Anna once and for all. Candace's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white as she pulled into her circular driveway. 3 black sedans were parked in front of the house, the kind that screamed expensive legal representation. Through the large front windows, she could see silhouettes moving in the living room, and the sight made her stomach clench with dread. She sat in her car for a moment, Detective Collins's words echoing in her mind. "Your father has spent decades controlling your family's narrative." But as she stared at the imposing Georgian mansion that had been both her childhood home and her gilded cage, Candace realized that tonight the narrative would finally change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Anna. "Whatever he's planning, don't let him intimidate you. You're stronger than you know. I believe in you." Those words from the daughter she'd abandoned gave Candace the strength to walk through her own front door. The scene in the living room was even worse than she'd imagined. Chuck sat behind his massive mahogany desk, which had been moved from his study to dominate the space. 3 lawyers in identical dark suits flanked him like sentries. Adrian sat rigidly on the couch, his face pale with shock, while Debbie, her 20-year-old daughter, who still lived at home, looked between everyone with growing confusion. "Ah, Candace," Chuck said without looking up from the documents spread before him. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing how to handle our little problem." "She's not a problem, Dad," Adrian said quietly. But his voice carried a new strength. "She's family. She is a threat to this family's reputation and financial security," Chuck snapped. "And thanks to your mother's emotional display the other night, she now has leverage over us." Candace remained standing in the doorway, her heart pounding. "What are you planning, Daddy?" Chuck finally looked up and Candace saw something in his eyes that chilled her. Not anger, but cold calculation. "I'm planning to neutralize the situation before it destroys everything we've built." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mrs. Murphy, perhaps you should sit down. What we're about to discuss is rather complex." "I'll stand. Thank you." Candace's voice was steadier than she felt. Chuck smiled, but it was the predatory smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. "Very well. Let me explain what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, we will be filing restraining orders against Anna Donalds, citing harassment and attempted extortion." "That's a lie," Adrian jumped to his feet. "Is it?" Chuck pulled out a photograph, one of Anna at the charity gala. "We have witnesses who heard her threaten to expose our family at a national conference. We have evidence of her hiring private investigators to dig into our personal affairs. We have documentation of her tracking down family members and confronting them at public events." Candace felt sick. "You're twisting everything." "I'm protecting us," Chuck said firmly. "But that's not all. We're also filing a lawsuit against her for emotional distress and defamation, seeking damages in the amount of $5 million. The room went silent except for Debbie's sharp intake of breath. $5 million for what? For 23 years of lies, Chuck said matter-of-factly. "You see, Debbie, what your mother never told you is that she had another child before you and Adrian. A child she gave up for adoption because she was young and made a mistake." Debbie stared at her mother in shock. "You had another baby? Before Candace could answer, Chuck continued his narrative. But this woman, this Anna, has spent years spreading lies about our family, claiming we abandoned her when the truth is that she was placed with a loving family through proper legal channels. That's not what happened, Candace whispered. But Chuck bulldozed over her. She's now attempting to extort money from us by threatening to go public with her fabricated story of abandonment and racism. She's calculated, manipulative, and dangerous to everything we've worked to build. Candace watched in horror as her father painted Anna as a villain and positioned himself as the victim. It was masterful manipulation, the kind he'd perfected over decades of controlling his family's story. The restraining order will prevent her from contacting any member of this family, one of the lawyers explained. The lawsuit will drain her financial resources and force her to focus on defending herself rather than attacking you. And the public narrative will be that the Murphy family is the victim of a calculated extortion attempt. But none of that is true, Adrian said, his voice growing stronger. Chuck's eyes flashed dangerously. What's true, Adrian, is that this family has a reputation to protect and financial interests to preserve. If this woman is allowed to continue her campaign against us, it will cost us millions in lost business relationships and social standing. So, you're going to destroy her life to protect your reputation? Candace asked, finding her voice. I'm going to do what I should have done 23 years ago, Chuck said coldly. I'm going to make sure she can never hurt this family again. Candace stared at her father, really looked at him, and for the first time saw him clearly, not as the powerful patriarch she'd spent her life trying to please, but as a man so consumed with control and image that he would destroy his own granddaughter to protect his reputation. No, she said quietly. Chuck raised an eyebrow.